Only about 10% of Americans wait until 70 to collect Social Security. The other 90% file earlier, most of them running a break-even calculation that is missing 3 variables. And those 3 missing variables, depending on your situation, can shift the real answer by anywhere from 5 to 15 years. So before we talk about 62 versus 70, before we talk about break-even ages and head starts and monthly differences, I want to show you exactly what is missing from the version of this math that everyone is using. Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Let us start with what everyone already knows, because you need the foundation before you can understand where it falls apart. Social Security lets you file as early as 62 and as late as 70. Every single month you wait between those 2 ages, your monthly benefit grows a little. It is not a yearly jump the way a lot of people assume. It is monthly, which means you could file at 62 and 2 months or 65 and 7 months, and every one of those dates produces a different benefit that follows you for the rest of your life. If you file at 62, you collect 70% of what you were owed at your full retirement age. If you wait until 70, you collect 124%. That 54-point difference is what makes the timing of this decision matter as much as it does. Now here is the math that everybody runs. Say you can take $2,000 a month at 62 or wait 5 years and collect $2,800 a month starting at 67. The person who files at 62 starts collecting immediately, while the person who waits gets nothing for 5 years. By the time the later filer gets their first check, the early filer has already pocketed $120,000. The later filer is behind. The $800 monthly gap starts closing that distance. Divide $120,000 by $800 and you get 150 months, which is about 12 and a half years. Add that to 67 and you land somewhere around 79 and a half. That is the break-even age most people walk away with. Live past 79 and a half, waiting paid off, die before it, and filing early was the better call. That is the math. And here is what nobody wants to admit about it. It is missing 3 things, and each one of those missing pieces moves that number in ways that would genuinely shock most people if they saw it laid out in front of them. The first thing everyone forgets about is the cost of living adjustment. Social Security does not pay you the same flat dollar amount every month for the rest of your life. It adjusts every year for inflation. In 2026, that adjustment was 2.8%. In 2025, it was 2.5%. And the reason this matters in the break-even calculation is not complicated once you see it. When both benefits are growing every year by the same percentage, they are not growing by the same dollar amount. A 2.8% increase on $2,800 adds $78 to that check. The same 2.8% on $2,000 adds only $56. So the gap between the two benefits widens in raw dollars every single year. The larger benefit is pulling ahead in a way that straight-line math never captures. Most calculators ignore this entirely, or they handle it so crudely that the result is still wrong. The $120,000 head start that the early filer built up is not sitting still, while the two strategies race toward each other. It is being eroded faster than the simple version of this math ever shows you. The second mistake is treating this as a solo decision, when for most people it is absolutely not a solo decision. If you are married, the Social Security filing decision belongs to the household, not to either individual inside of it. And the reason is straightforward. When one spouse dies, one benefit disappears. The surviving spouse keeps the larger of the two. That one fact rewrites the entire calculation. Think about what that means in practice. If the higher earner in a couple files early and gets a reduced benefit and then dies first, the surviving spouse is locked into collecting off that reduced number for the rest of their life. On the other hand, if the higher earner waits until 70 and builds that benefit up to its maximum and then passes away at 76 or 78 or 80, the surviving spouse steps up to that larger number and collects it potentially for another 15 or 20 years. The dollar difference on that survivor benefit, compounded over decades, can be staggering. This is why financial planners who really understand this math will almost always tell you that for married couples, the higher earner delaying is 1, of the most powerful moves available, not because the break-even math looks great for that individual in isolation, but because the household math, when you factor in what happens if one person lives to 92, looks completely different. Running two separate break-even analyses for two spouses and then comparing them side by side is one of the most common and most expensive mistakes in retirement planning. There is one break-even for the couple, not two. Now here is the third mistake, and this is the one that most people have genuinely never heard of before, even people who have spent real time researching this decision, even people who consider themselves financially literate. This one tends to land like a surprise even in rooms full of people who thought they had already figured this out. When you file at 62 and start collecting $2,000 a month, that money covers your living expenses, which means you do not have to pull $2,000 a month out of your IRA or your 401k or wherever your retirement savings live. That money stays invested. It keeps compounding. It keeps growing. The person who waited and is not collecting Social Security yet has to get that $2,000 a month from somewhere. So they are pulling it out of their portfolio. That money stops growing the moment it leaves the account. It is gone from the compounding equation. So now you are not just comparing two different Social Security payment schedules. You are comparing two different portfolio balances. Because in one scenario, roughly $120,000 worth of retirement assets stayed invested and earned a return over 5 years. In the other scenario, that same $120,000 was withdrawn and spent. At a 5% growth rate, $2,000 a month left untouched for 5 years does not stay at $120,000. It grows to somewhere around $136,000. And the money that stayed in the portfolio does not stop growing once the person starts collecting Social Security. It keeps compounding while the $800 monthly difference is simultaneously trying to close the gap. So the target keeps moving. At a 5% growth rate, the real break-even age in our example does not land at 79. It lands around 84 or 85. That is 5 or 6 years later than the standard calculation shows. Same starting numbers, different answer, because the standard calculation left out the most important variable. Push that growth rate to 7% and the break-even pushes out toward 90. At 8% for a lot of realistic scenarios, the math never catches up at all. Now, before you hear that and decide you are filing at 62 no matter what, there is something important to understand about that growth rate assumption. The money you are planning to live on in the years between when you retire and when you file is not sitting in aggressive growth stocks. It should not be. Money you are about to spend in the next year or two should not be exposed to the kind of volatility that produces 8 and 9% annual returns. You would be selling into whatever the market happens to be doing at the moment you need the cash, and that is a risk you do not want to take with money that is covering your groceries and your mortgage. So the realistic growth rate for most near retirees on the specific money they would be drawing from is probably somewhere in the 4 to 6% range. And at those rates, the break-even still shifts meaningfully, but it does not disappear entirely. What all of this adds up to is the following. The question is not whether you live past 79. That is the question the incomplete version of this math is asking. The real question is whether you live past 84 or 85, and whether both spouses need to make it that long or just one of them, and what your portfolio earns on the money that stays invested while you are deciding. Those are three completely different variables than the ones most people are working with, and here is the part that matters most, the part that connects everything. The title of this video is not wrong in a polite technical sense. The math that most people use when they make this decision is not just slightly off, it is missing years. In some cases, it is missing a decade. And since you cannot go back and change your filing date after the fact, since the number you pick follows you forever, getting this wrong is not a recoverable mistake. It is a permanent one. The correct version of this calculation factors in cost of living adjustments on both benefits simultaneously, treats married couples as a single financial unit with one unified strategy, and accounts for the growth on the money that stayed invested when you filed early versus the growth that never existed because you spent it to cover the gap. That is the real break-even, and it almost never lands where people expect.